Hello and welcome back to my channel. This is Aadi. I hope all of you had a great Diwali. Today I have done a little bit of research as to why suddenly the border with Pakistan has become heated up. Of course, it has been heated up for quite a while, but this whole activity on the 13th of November as well as surrounding dates gives a little bit of a question as to why now. What is happening with Pakistan? So stay tuned and find out. Before I begin, I'd like to request all of you to please hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon next to it so that you come to know when I've put out a new video, and of course like the videos, share them with your friends. Thank you for watching so far. Now, even as the situation on the border between India and China, that is the line of actual control, is somewhat stable, somewhat unstable, the situation on the other side, which is the line of control between India and Pakistan, is slow and steady heating up. It is a wonder why something like this is happening right now. Of course, Pakistan has resorted to ceasefire violations since the January month of this year, up to about 4,000 times, which is actually pretty much the highest amount that the Pakistanis have done since the ceasefire agreements of 2003. It came to a head in the past week or 10 days when the Pakistanis resorted to lethal amount of ceasefire violations on a particular sector, resulting in the loss of about 5 Indian servicemen along with a lot of civilians as well. They resorted to shelling army bunkers. They resorted to shelling the villages surrounding the line of control. This was retaliated to by the Indian Army very hard. As a matter of fact, we've all seen the videos going around of Pakistani bunkers being destroyed, as well as Pakistanis running scared from their bunkers, trying to hide from the fire that the Indian forces put upon them. I want to ask this one question. Is Pakistan just doing its regular activity by doing the ceasefire violation, or Pakistan is acting as per a larger game plan? I've done a little bit of research on this subject. Let's check it out. Now, of course, Indian Army officials always say that the Pakistani ceasefire violations in various sectors along the line of control is meant to cover up the infiltrators who are trying to come inside our side of the border and create mayhem. Well, in my opinion, that is one of the things, as well as the fact there is also a little bit of a larger game plan. Last week, the Pakistani Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi put out a document in their parliament which states that they have no doubts on the fact that the Indians are sabotaging the so-called Pakistan's lifeline of the CPEC, or the China-Pakistani Economic Corridor. Now, before I tell you what the game plan is, one thing again to note here is that India is pitted amongst two nuclear-armed neighbors, one on the east, one on the west. This puts India in a very, very precarious condition. One thing that we must understand is China sees India as one of its only competitors in the Asian region that can put a stop to Chinese growth. What Pakistanis want, I don't think they're even clear about it. So let's find out what this bigger game plan is all about. As I said, Chinese look at Indians as the biggest threat for their growth and development, as well as their control of the Southern Asian, or if I may put it that way, the Asian region. This is one of the reasons why that Beijing is trying to devise methods to tie down India into strategic knots in the region of the Himalayas. There are two reasons for this particular thing. One, as I mentioned earlier, and I will keep mentioning this, that India is the only power in this region that can put a stop to these precarious notions that the Chinese have. Secondly, the Chinese also feel that they have to find a way, not just directly, but also indirectly, to put pressure on the country so that China could come out as somebody who's standing on the side and watching this whole thing. The Chinese, of course, have tried their best to put pressure on the Indian Armed Forces along the line of actual control in various sectors. But of course, this rapid reaction done by the Indian Armed Forces, coupled with the morale and the occupation of strategic heights in the region, has put the Chinese into a conundrum as to what it should do. In my opinion, that is where the sideline state of Pakistan comes into play. China is, of course, rattled by the growth of the Indian Armed Forces, the country of India, and the economic power of India. It is also threatened by the name of India, which has been going up in the past 5 or 6 years. One of the biggest things today is Chinese feel surrounded by India, looking at the naval exercising happening with the development of the Quad, as well as the silent defeat given by the Indian Armed Forces to the Chinese in the Galwan Valley. Of course, that meant a loss of 20 of our brave soldiers. But one thing I can tell you, and that the government has also said very clearly along with the armed forces who agreed with this, that they did not die in vain. They took more Chinese with them down, and that is something that the Chinese cannot accept openly. There have been photographs of these graves coming out, there have been photographs of veterans protesting the fact that the Chinese could not give a decent burial and respect to their soldiers who lost their lives in the battle with India. These are some of the reasons which build a lot of pressure on the Chinese. Well, the Chinese have really thought that why not bring in the cost-effective method of trying to put some pressure on India. Easiest example or the easiest answer to this question is Pakistan. The tactics that the Chinese have involved is to try and frustrate the Indians into responding towards Pakistan so that they come into a little bit of a more strengthened position in this region, because they know they would not be able to take the might of the Indian army single-handedly. As a matter of fact, one thing to notice that the Pakistanis did recently was to try and provide for the area of Gilgit-Baltistan to become a province of Pakistan. They want to have elections, so-called free and fair elections in that region, despite objections to this fact made by the Indian government. These regions have been illegally occupied by the Pakistanis during the war in 1947-49. This, in my mind, is pressure that the Chinese are putting towards Pakistanis to try and open another front in the northern part of India so as to relieve some pressure that they themselves are under. One thing I'm sure all of us will agree with, that the Pakistanis are always very pro-China. Being an Islamic or a Muslim country, they never speak about the prosecution of the Uyghur Muslims happening in the Xinjiang region. As a matter of fact, they are quite mum about this fact. They say that this is China's internal matters. Why should we say anything? Another thing for China is that Pakistan as a country or as a landmass is not just important against India. It is also important to reduce their dependence on the Straits of Malacca, which they know can be blocked out by the naval powers formed in the Quad today. This access into Pakistan gives them a headway into the Gulf, into Iran and the Sunni Gulf states. Pakistanis, of course, are the middlemen in this entire thing. They are doing this for personal gains. Pakistan is no friend of any country. I don't think they're even a friend of the Chinese, but they have pretty much no option today. Additionally, by stepping up aggression as well as provoking India, what Pakistan is trying to do is get the world's eyes to this region, especially with the changing trend in the United States election, which is hung even now. One of the biggest things for India to do is to avoid falling into these Pakistani traps. They are trying their level best to provoke India by doing various things which they feel would frustrate this country. They don't realize the fact that the Indians are not really bothered about this silly dialogues that they come up with every day. What today India is bothered about is development and welfare of its own people. China, on its part, of course, is worried about the billions and the billions of dollars it has thrown into Pakistan as part of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or the CPEC. This CPEC was signed between both the countries somewhere in 2015 when the Chinese president visited Pakistan. China pledged about $46 billion for a range of infrastructure projects, and especially one major road which will go down to the port of Gwadar. When CPEC was announced, the then Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and the Chinese Premier mentioned that the total investment of this $46 billion would be in way of loans. However, as time has gone by, one has seen to realize that amongst the $46 billion that was actually promised to the Pakistanis, the Chinese have only invested up to about $26.5 billion. The CPEC, which is described by the Pakistanis, if I may put it another way, it is sworn by the Pakistanis as a gateway to its economic prosperity, encompasses about 18 major energy projects and infrastructural projects. Of course, as I mentioned, taking to operationalize the port of Gwadar, giving the Chinese access into the Gulf. This is very important for the Chinese because the Chinese now bring their oil going all across the southern part of the country, going into the Straits of Malacca, which they feel today is very vulnerable, seeing the fact that the Indian Navy has actively started controlling this entire Indian Ocean region. One thing to note about the CPEC, as I mentioned the amount earlier, it was supposed to be around about $46 billion. There were reports that this amount has gone up to about $64 billion, And now there are reports coming out which say that this amount is a debt trap for Pakistan, weighing at a total whopping $80 billion. 90% of this $80 billion would be paid for by Pakistan in the form of national debt. Pakistan, which literally produces nothing today, knows the fact that they will not be able to pay the Chinese back. But the main thing is that they have no other option. They, I am sure, are aware of what Chinese debt traps are all about and are aware of the fact that the Chinese are looking at grabbing Pakistani land. They are, I am sure, aware of the fact that they are going to lose the land which they so called their home and their sovereignty over that region. These projects do not have or appear to have even the slightest potential to get Pakistan out of its problems. Now the CPEC itself has come into various problems. One of the biggest thing is the most famous corruption which happens in the country of Pakistan. Corruption aside, the dogged resistance from the Baloch nationalists. On one hand, they're convincing their so-called best friend that there are no security threats, but on the other hand, they go into their own parliament and say India is the biggest security threat to the CPEC. The attack on the Pearl Continental Hotel made it clear to the Pakistanis that the area of Balochistan is not under their control. One of the other attacks that happened was the attack at the stock exchange in Karachi, which is again built up and operated by the Chinese. This was a clear message by the Balochis to both these parties that this nonsense is not going to be acceptable on their land. Now, one thing that comes around from here is that the Chinese are using Pakistan. Whether the Pakistanis actually do realize it or not is a different story. Chinese have their own motives, and if the Pakistanis feel that they will be able to mold how the Chinese are going to think, well, they're living in dreamland. As I mentioned earlier, not one Chinese soldier will be lost against India to help out Pakistan. Because let me assure you this, that the Chinese look at Pakistanis with a very, very dim view. Especially with the failure of the CPEC, the Chinese have lost total confidence in the relationship between the Chinese and the Pakistanis today. Coming back to my country, I really believe that India, as it is undertaking, must undertake harder and faster second generation economic reforms to attract huge amount of foreign investment, technology, especially in the sectors of manufacturing and defense. India today has an opportunity that even the Chinese did not have in that time, and we must succeed. I sincerely believe that the initiative of Atmanirbhar Bharat has been timed at the right time. As far as the defense is concerned, we can always notice that the DRDO suddenly has gone on to steroids, going across and testing various kinds of weapons on various different platforms in the past month and a half. It is a great thing to boost up the defense sector in this country. India should not only be the biggest importer of weapons, it should now convert from being the biggest importer to the biggest exporter of weapons across the world. This, coupled with large infrastructure projects which would boost the economy, which would make us strong enough to stand up against China in both military as well as economic fora. India in the past some time has successfully been able to put a lot of counter pressure on the Chinese as well as the Pakistanis by showcasing superior diplomacy and tactics, something we have never seen in the history of this country. We must stand by and do this harder and better every day. The Chinese only understand the language of strength and nothing else. I strongly believe the more firmness that we show, the better it is for us. Pakistan today has left to become a rogue insect that needs to be tolerated for our existence as well as development. This has been shown to Pakistan time and again by the world itself. It fails me to wonder why the Pakistanis cannot be blacklisted in the FATF and various other forums, knowing the fact that the Pakistanis are the biggest suppliers and the biggest supporters of terrorism in this world. The answer is only one and simple: the Chinese. They have their own interest in that particular region. Their interest, which comes out from my talk, is putting counter pressure on India as well as having a gateway into the Middle East open just for them. Doing this, they would not mind sacrificing the entire nation of Pakistan. I call upon the country of Pakistan to wake up, and if there is even one sane voice in this country, to realize what trap they are getting into. We as countrymen in India, we must keep our hands away from cheap Chinese copies of various products and strangle them as best we can do with the power of 1.37 billion Indians. TikTok is one of the biggest examples how we can kick China economically, and one must realize it is not just a simple app of sharing photographs. TikTok as a platform lost its largest consumer base across the world in a swoop of a pen. It is something we must understand and we must put across as our strength. It is the people of this country that must contribute to the strangulation of the Chinese and to stop them in their tracks with their silly plans to be a superpower. India must be a rising star in this century, and it is for all of us to contribute to make sure that we become that. Thank you for watching my video. Subscribe to my channel, share it with your friends, and of course, yes, and don't forget to share a thought for our soldiers standing in the battle lines in the land, sea and in the air, once a day, every day. Jai Hind.